You can hit a point where you're so unique that you're isolated to the point where you kind of don't do anything. Sometimes it's very easy to come up with why you do or don't do a certain thing. Most of the time, somebody has to be shown why they should care. As an individual, you have to invent a reason to do literally everything, and that is hard.
If we can agree that potential exists and is highly valuable, it stands to reason that wasting that potential is a bad thing.
It's not okay to do nothing. It should bother you to do nothing. If it doesn't, you really need to consider why.
It's better to just plow ahead and do stuff and not worry about having some grand explanation, because the benefits will reveal themselves along the way. Hey, welcome to the Create Unknown, the home of Make Something Mean Something. It is TCU's Day. We are back after a short break for the holiday. I hope everyone had a very lovely Christmas. We were inspired by actually a Christmas event that we came across on Twitter that we'll be talking about. But before we get to that, my name is Kevin Lieber, and with me as always is Matthew Tabor.
Yeah, it's grim. You made it sound hopeful and exciting, like some kind of Christmas miracle feel. It's actually awful, isn't it? It's horrible. It's like the anti-feel-good topic.
It is, but I hope actually that by discussing it, maybe we could shine a light on it, bring some levity, some clarity, perhaps. I don't know. We'll sort of see what happens, but I think that it's time. It's time to talk about.
Is it time? Something
that has been bubbling, I think, for years now. Something that I actually think that we have ignored to the detriment of our listeners on this podcast before. Yeah. And
we've definitely brought it up a little bit, but we've definitely sidestepped it too.
Yeah. So, but before we get to that, again, if you haven't listened to our last couple of episodes, we will be back in full force with guests after the new year. I just finished actually the class of 2022 graphic. Yesterday. I haven't tweeted it out yet though, because I think people are still hibernating. So after New Year's, I'll send that out. I did pop it in the Discord, but it was nice.
Good spread.
Yeah, it was nice. It's always nice to see the collection of people that we spoke with over the course of a year, because it ends up being a lot. And not that you forget, but you sort of kind of do forget a little bit.
Veritable rogues gallery, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's also cool to see the juxtaposition of different people. I forget which one you pointed out, that we had two guests butted up against each other who were extremely different. Like, that's always kind of fun to see, to see the range.
Yeah. We enjoy that range, being hopelessly stupid, but highly analytical at the same time. So let's get hopelessly stupid and highly analytical about a topic that popped on Twitter, which is, I'll just read the tweet and then we can kind of expand upon it. So this tweet went kind of virally. Now that you can see views on Twitter, you can see it has 1.7 million views and 27,000 likes. And it goes a little something like this. It's from somebody with the handle Meme Gene, which is great, and an avatar of gold, Dust, the wrestler. It says, asked the Zoomer nephew what kids at his school are interested in or into, and he said, nothing. Nobody really does anything. Now, this is something, like you said, that we have sort of poked around the edges of. In particular, it made me think of our episode with Rick Beato, in which he mentioned having similar conversations because he has some younger kids. And, obviously when you have kids, their friends come over and you ask them, well, if you're Rick Beato, you ask them what music you're into, because that's what Rick Beato does. And he suggested, over and over again that that generation of kids is not into any music. Like, it's just not a thing. It's not on the radar of interests. They really like video games a lot, is what he said, but not really bands or musicians, which is incredibly different than from how we grew up, in which, like, literally my earliest memories are listening to records and dancing to music as like a 3-year-old.
Yeah, and you would describe yourself as a kid in terms of the music that you listen to. Like that. That's kind of the easiest way to open your identity at that time. It was like sports you played or music you listened to. Just it was on the short list of identity stuff. So when you hear somebody like Rick saying, like, kids aren't really into anything.
Well, Rick is saying music. He was saying music specifically. This tweet takes it a step further, in which it says they're not into anything, nothing. Nobody really does anything. And, we have spoken in the past, we did our Boomer, like, reacts to Zoomer episode or whatever it was called. I don't remember, in which we spoke to Psychic Pebbles about this as well, in which we have talked about the many, many ways that life is, like, unfathomably amazing in modern times. It's, safer. Everything is safer and easier, and the array of options that you have in almost any arena of life is limitless. And we got pushback from people listening about the ways in which life is worse. And that's valid. And those are things that I think that we should be talking about as a result of this tweet and this episode and the comments that we got on that episode, in which it is impossible and unfair to ignore the many, many ways, despite life being many, many ways amazing, the many, many ways it is a lot worse today for kids growing up in this era.
It is, and the fracture is what is probably the most different. Actually, Magnus in the chat has just brought this up by saying, aside from a few phenomena, everyone's tastes and interests are an island unto themselves. That's absolutely true, and we've talked about that how easy it is to dive deeply into your own niche. I mean, and combination of interests too. So not only one thing that very few people are into, you can go deep into it and get swallowed up by it, but you can have 7 of those things, and nobody has that combination enough to, for you to identify with lots of different people. And that's really different from, 25 years ago. You would be able to walk down the halls of a school and group kids by what music you thought they listened to based on how they looked and acted and talked. And you probably wouldn't be too far wrong. I think you generally would get it right if you tried to categorize people that way. Well, so that means that a significant percentage has all of these shared interests and shared experiences and all that. Right now, it's insanely difficult to have shared anything. A lot of TV shows are based on this premise where the one shared thing brings together an incredibly diverse group of people who have virtually nothing in common. One that pops into my head is The Guild with Felicia Day. That was a web series way back in the day. Mm-hmm. And the premise of it was that an MMO RPG guild meets up in real life, and it's the stay-at-home mom, it's the nerdy coder, it's like the cool, this mix of ethnicities and geographic locations and ages and life circumstances and all of that. There's nothing shared other than their participation in this game. Well, that's really, really cool in one way, that you can go into this niche and just have a shocking array of people. For me, lately I've been putting a lot of time into reloading stuff, ammunition reloading. 30 years ago, I would have to go to the local rod and gun club to learn that. it wouldn't be a terribly diverse group of people. It just wouldn't. I'm in a relatively small place, and the sorts of people who are members at the Rod and Gun Club, they're all similar in terms of background and how they live their lives, right? Well, now I go on a forum, and you get this array of people who, I met a guy a couple weeks ago who was telling me that he is an engineer on a ship, which is weird as hell considering how far away I live from water. But I guess he lives around here, and he drives to the ocean, I suppose, and drives to the coast, and will go out on a ship for 3 weeks and drive home. And like, that's super weird. Like that's not the typical like reloading guy from the Rod and Gun Club, So anyway, I meet somebody who has one shared interest, but a completely different life. That is so cool in so many ways. However, it is overall really tough to go outside yourself when you're constantly just encountering different things, different people, processing your life with them, and then moving on to doing that again. It's like your whole life is a movie like the 50 First Dates, where like everything you do is this weird first date kind of thing, and you don't really put the time into deep, sustainable things. Everybody's so different and doing their own unique combination of things.
Yeah, and well, when you were talking about TV, all of a sudden I thought of, this is a much older reference, but The Breakfast Club from the 80s, which was one of the most iconic movies from the 1980s. There's this comedy called The Breakfast Club that takes place in high school, and these kids all get detention. And the whole point of that is that there are very clearly differentiated kind of stereotypes, archetypes of high school student. There's jock. There's like the spoiled princess. There's kind of the goth sort of girl.
Right, the dark, quiet one.
Yeah, there's the nerd. And then there's like the bad boy. And that's and what makes that movie work, that I'd be fascinated to know how a Zoomer audience would watch that movie, because I don't know. I don't know how these things play out today. I have absolutely no idea. But I could tell you that back then, like, those were the niches. It was like there was like a handful of different type of high school kid that I know obviously it's exaggerated to a degree, but not that harsh of a degree. Like, more or less, there was like a handful of cliques or groups you could sort of mold your way into. And that was sort of it. That was sort of how like we grew up. It was like, you're one of about roughly 5 to, I don't know, seven different types of people. And those were the shared interests. It's like, I'm a nerd, so I hang out with other nerds, and what do nerds do? Play video games, read comic books, play D&D. It's like, that's nerd stuff. Now, all of that stuff is mainstream. Like, everybody plays video games. So like, how do you stand out, or how do you feel like you're part of something when everybody does everything?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned D&D, because there's a really clear example of this with Stranger Things. The kids in Stranger Things, in the core group of 4 kids, they are basically the same. They're substantially similar. They have their own identity within it, and that identity changes a little bit as they get older. But they're pretty much the same type of kid, and that's why they get along and why they do their thing. That as the show develops, some different people work in. I think, is the kid's name Eddie, the metalhead with long hair in the newest season? That's an example of like, oh, here's a completely different background kid coming into the mix. And by the way, this is the phrase Motley Crue. It's not just a band name. A Motley Crue is the mix of varying types of people in one group. And it was a desirable thing. Like, everybody wanted this kind of Motley Crue-ish mix on everything for like 20 years. And now it's a little too motley.
It's no longer
now
a crew.
You
just have Molly.
It's no longer a crew. Yeah. That's the point. Like that's I think the conclusion on that thread when you pull it is like, well, is everybody so individual that they're living in their own head? And if that's the case, how do you convince yourself to really do anything? Because we talk a lot about creative stuff and doing it for yourself, and that's really what drives kind of most people with the art stuff. Like, they're happy with doing it, they're obsessed with it, they have to get it out of their system, or any of these things. It has to do with themselves. But you can hit a point, and I think we're beginning to hit that, where you're so separated and so unique that you're isolated to the point where you kind of don't do anything. And that's bad. That's the tweet, No one is better off when everybody's just doing nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't know what you've been sipping, but you've got it all wrong. It's time to commit to the Leaf. We've embraced the smoothness and surprising pick-me-up that tea provides. I literally drink it all day long, nearly a gallon a day, and it powers me through research, script writing, and forums on websites that I refuse to name here. But we don't drink normie NPC tea. We drink cultured and refined anime tea from the Dragon's Treasure. Kevin still likes the gunpowder green called Space Cowboy, and I've sampled nearly 40 Dragon's Treasure teas at this point. Lately, I've been slamming black teas like Kentucky Bourbon and liquefied Berserk Despair. Scottish Breakfast is deep and peaty, and I smooth it over with Sebastian's Morning Earl Grey, which has the best vanilla cream taste I think I've ever had in a cup. Give me a pot of that with a hot meatball sub from Sal's Pizza and Brooks Barbecue Chicken to wash down my last meal on death row. I highly recommend the sampler packs. You'll want to try everything just like I did. I literally have not had one tea that I wouldn't be happy to reorder. The Dragon's Wings membership fuels new tea experimentation, and the Tea of the Month Club provides a regularly scheduled surprise. And when you order from the Dragon's Treasure using code CREATE, you'll get 10% off your order. That's 10% off using the code CREATE at thedragonstreasure.com. The link's in the description.
So I think a couple of things that I thought of, before we started recording as it relates to this topic. One of which is that I feel as though this is kind of like a bigger concept, but I feel as though a lot of things that were not just taken for granted, but were sort of inherently understood are no longer inherently understood, and we're having to have discussions like this to explain why they matter. Like, we're having to sort of rationalize and explain things for the first time that never had to be explained before because it was just understood inherently. And now they're not understood inherently, and we're having to have podcasts and listen to thought leaders and read articles to try to articulate better things that were just how life was, which is a really weird place to be. And I think something that perhaps that if you and I can be involved in helping people better understand, why bother being interested in things or why bother doing anything? Well, I think that's a really important role to play.
Yeah. And this is big. And it's strange because there are so many specifics that really show how it works, but don't explain the problem. So, like, for example, a question that pops up this time of year, every year now, is, what are you doing for Christmas? That wasn't a question to me 30 years ago. It wasn't, there weren't a lot of options. I mean, obviously not everybody celebrates Christmas, but it was like, yeah, you're going to do some Christmas type of thing with your family. The end. Nobody thought you were going to do anything else. There weren't any options on the table. It just did not come up with a question. And now I don't know what anybody's doing for Christmas. Like, I have to ask around for the most part. The only person I know is me, and it's easy for me because I live very close to my parents. So it's like, yeah, I'm going to go down the hill. Like, this is what I do. But Yeah, and Magnus is saying it in the chat, like a quarter of the people he knows leave the country for 2 weeks. Yeah, people go on vacations. They do all sorts of stuff around the holidays.
But the question I think, and we don't have to turn this podcast into this, and I don't want to, but I don't think it's what are you doing for Christmas? It's why bother celebrating Christmas? Why bother getting together with your family? Why bother giving gifts? There was a tweet that had like 200,000 likes that was like, why would I spend my money on other people when I could just spend all that money on myself and get exactly what I want? And I'm like, this is where we're at. But this is where we're at. This is where we're at. Like everything is just being questioned to a degree where it's like, okay, I guess we have to just start all over?
Yeah, it's really tough for people to have a sense of why you do anything. And like, I know that you've brought up before, Kevin, that like this is a major part of Vsauce 2 videos, is you have to answer the question of why do I need to know this? That's, and this was something, there was a man who was famous in the education community. His reputation is tainted now, Dr. Bill Cosby. But he before
doctor.
Oh yeah, no.
Bill
he got his EDD. Yeah, I believe at UMass Amherst. I'm pretty sure it was in the University of Massachusetts system. But he was quite serious about education back before he became accountable for his actions. And he spent a lot of time post-acting, hopping around to places and giving speeches and things like that. And he had one that went viral at the time. I'm sure it's on YouTube or something like that. But he's on stage and he pulls this aside where he's like, hey, the big question is if a kid asks you, why do I have to know this? You need to be able to answer it. That first and foremost, if you can't answer that question, nothing matters. And that's those answers were built in for most things until recently. It was obvious why you did things. It's obvious why you spent money on other people at Christmas, why you gave them things, rather than every person just going to buy what they want and maximizing their happiness.
Quote, unquote.
You have to explain that now.
Like theoretically maximizing their happiness.
Yeah. Yes, on paper, you spend money on yourself. Everybody's by default getting what they want. Happiness. Like, no, there's more to it than that.
There's more to it than that. Yeah, it's not just getting stuff.
Yeah, but that question of like, why do I do this is real, and this is the number one struggle on all things with history. So like, I cringe hard. I got an email from my college's history department. They sent around a newsletter, and I read the whole thing about all the different things that undergrads, grads were doing, professors, all this. It's like 95% of this, I don't have a clue why I should give a single shit about any of it. I do not care. They assumed that I cared. Well, they shouldn't assume that I care, because most of the time I don't. I need to be made interested. I need to understand why what seems like a really niche project in a research project actually matters in a broad sense, and so many people who are interested in history assume that everybody else values history. They don't care. You have to inculcate and develop a feeling of why something matters. You have to do that. I mean, you've always had to do it. That is how you get people to buy into literally everything. Everything. It makes a lot of sense on religious stuff. You think that nobody's going to give their life or mind or philosophy over to a system like a religion unless they understand why it matters. If you can't communicate that, you're simply not going to grow as a religion. That makes sense. But it's like that with everything. Sometimes it's really easy. 300 years ago, we didn't have pizza. Now we do. Everybody likes pizza because they eat it and it tastes amazing and they're sold. They know, they got sold on pizza because they got a reason to consume it. It tastes really good. Well, Brussels sprouts don't have that same thing. You have to communicate like, oh, this is very high in nutrients that you need and whatever.
They changed
and hope that
Brussels
works.
sprouts. Did you read that article? Do you know this?
No.
Yeah,
No.
Brussels sprout. The taste of Brussels sprouts has changed since we were kids.
Is it less bitter?
I don't want to be.
Because I like them a lot.
I don't know if it was since we were kids or since our parents were kids. It might be since our parents were kids. I'm not exactly sure. But I do remember when we were kids, that was the joke all the time, was like, kids hate Brussels sprouts and Brussels sprouts are gross. That was in like every cartoon.
Yes, that was the joke.
That was the joke.
Yep.
It's like, oh
That was
God,
the joke, yeah.
Brussels sprouts, ew. And they like literally taste much better now. I don't know. I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to use two completely opposite examples because pretty much everything else is in between those two things. Reality exists in the middle of two extremes. So sometimes it's very easy to come up with why you do or don't do a certain thing. Most of the time, somebody has to be shown why they should care. When you spend 30 years telling everybody to do their own thing and their own individual reality is it, that's the pinnacle. As an individual, you have to invent a reason to do literally everything, and that is hard. That is incredibly time-consuming. It's incredibly difficult because you can't possibly know very many things. You're one person in, I don't know how many people have existed. It's something like 100 billion over time. 100 billion people have lived, and then you at 22 years old with very specific and limited life experiences through no fault of your own. You can only live one life. If you grow up in Nebraska, you don't know what it's like to grow up in China. So by default, you have a narrow vision on the world. You have to come up with a reason to do everything? No, it's brutal. It's impossible. It's impossible. And it's super easy to take that series of tasks that are, number one, very heavy. Coming up with a reason for things is like as heavy as it gets. And then number two, constant. It's fired at you like a machine gun. You look at that and think, well, I'm going to shut down. I'm not going to do anything. Who cares? And that's it. It makes a lot of sense. But wow, is that a grim conclusion? Like that end is not healthy. It's not good. Think of all the talent that is in our Discord server, for example. Imagine if all those people just like, I'm not going to do anything anymore. That's a lot of music that's not being made. It's a lot of good videos that aren't being made. A lot of art that doesn't happen. None of those people have to do anything. They don't. They could decide to just stop at any time. So what keeps them from doing that?
Well, a couple of things. First, I wanted to address a comment in the chat. Mike Spaghetti Jones left a great comment, actually, about how Christmas movies were always about why we celebrate Christmas and the meaning of Christmas and stuff. So like that.
Oh, I see that comment.
Yeah, suggesting, that question has always been kind of at the heart of a lot of Christmas media, which is a really good point. And I think the difference, though, into what we're talking about is that at the time, that was sort of like a reinforcer. It was like a feel-good thing, sort of to be reminded while you're already sort of entrenched in the celebration. Whereas just asking the question seriously and not being involved is a different experience. I don't know if like disengaging and asking the question is different than being engaged and being reminded of sort of the purpose of it. I don't know if that makes sense, but when you're in anything, whether you're like a sports team or any group, you do always remind yourselves why you do what you do. That's sort of part of the reinforcement process of any group coalescing behavior. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that, yes, asking, like Christmas movies, I've always asked why we celebrate Christmas, but I think that that's part of the function of enjoying Christmas is reinforcing what it means and everything. So I don't think that is a question of questioning it as if like we shouldn't do it. It's more, I'm fumbling through this because I'm thinking of it like as I think of it. I'm saying words as I think them, but am I making sense here? Like this is not a bug, it's a feature sort of thing. Hi, this is Kevin. After recording, I thought of a better way to describe this whole thing about the Christmas movies, talking about the spirit of Christmas. And that is, the difference is, this is a pep talk as opposed to a lecture. So a pep talk, like at a sports rally or before a big game or something, is a way to coalesce a group who is already fully committed and engaged to an activity, as opposed to a lecture in which you're trying to teach someone who may not be on board or understand or know anything about an idea. So that's, to me, the difference that I failed miserably, and the nuance I failed miserably at differentiating pep talk, not lecture. Okay, back to the podcast.
Yes, I think that's completely right. And if I think a lot of things can't be expressed that way, and so they haven't been. So like with Christmas, it's, Mike pops in the chat, the thing that the themes, the why you do this is a constant theme in those movies. Well, it's also the same theme over and over. Like, it's really easy to put those themes in because they're really well defined. It's a little bit tougher to say, like, why do I like football? Kevin and I both like the NFL. I think we probably like it for different reasons. I'm sure we like a couple of the same reasons, but here's an example. Kevin, you hate football games that are in really bad weather.
Yes.
Those are my favorites. I love disgusting weather, especially if it's freakishly cold and snowy. Now, I love the shit show aspect of football in that regard. Kevin, you hate the fact that it negates like all talent and skill. So, we would not be able to probably express as cleanly why somebody should like football compared to why they should give gifts at Christmas. But I think that's a feature too. You've got to be able to explain clearly why somebody should be into something. And if you can't, you've got a problem with that thing. If you can't put that theme in whatever you're doing, whether it's talking to a friend or creating a piece of art, you need to think a little harder. And maybe the thing isn't as put together as you think it is. There was one man who was a master of this back in the day, and it was Frank Capra. He was a filmmaker. He did It's a Wonderful Life, since we're speaking of Christmas. He did Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. That might be all I can name at the moment. That was in the 30s. But he popped into my head because he also did a series called Why We Fight. And this was a series of films that started after the attack on Pearl Harbor and once the U.S. got into World War II. It was exactly what you would guess from the title. It was an explanation of why it was the right move for the United States to enter and continue in World War II. That meant showing, why the Nazis were bad. That meant showing why the U.S. should even care about what's happening very far away in the world. I mean, Pearl Harbor was a little bit different, but the war in Europe really wasn't a super concern for a lot of the U.S. And they needed to know why do we bother doing this? Like, it's hard to convince a country to go to war and stay at war. You can see that there was far less shared thought about like the war in Afghanistan. If you asked 100 people in 1943 why we were fighting the Nazis, 95 of them are going to give basically the same answer. If you asked 100 people 5 years ago why we were in Afghanistan, well, with 100 people, you're going to get 300 answers to that question. So that's really the difference on clarity. I think most of the time people think that everything they do is this self-evident thing. It's not. And we've touched on this in the last few weeks in a lot of different ways. Like, Kevin, you explained why you make goofy little cartoons now. You can express that clearly. You can tell people exactly why you decided to do that again. As I've been doing streams lately, I've talked about why I'm doing the things I'm doing. So, for example, I cleaned a holster, leather holster and gun belt that was found in a house that my parents tore down to build their own. And it's from the 1870s. That has meaning to me because of how the thing was procured. They found it in the wreckage of this house as they were dealing with that wreckage and clearing it. That's a family heirloom to me. It's not valuable at all, not objectively, but it is to me, and I can express that clearly. Well, I think we're hitting a point where no one knows why they should do anything. And if you don't have a why, if you don't have a clear purpose or a clear explanation for anything, you basically wind up doing nothing or worse. Or you do stuff that is 100%, I can't think of exactly the word I want to use here, but instant gratification is part of it. It just gets you through the moment, the hour, the day, the year, whatever. You can sit and scroll TikTok and Twitter all day, every day, and not feel bad about it. You know, you can play video games or watch YouTube videos or do anything where at the end of the day, have you accomplished anything? No, not really. Yeah, Charles says, scroll the memes, scroll them forever. Yeah, I could. I absolutely could, because I follow very funny people. I don't have dumb stinker memes in my feed. It's extremely well curated and amazing. I could sit there and do that all day long. A couple days where I've really been sick, like properly cannot function ill. Well, I that's kind of what I did all that day, and it was amazing. Being sick was the best. So yeah, you've got to know why you're doing anything so that you don't do nothing. Does that make any sense?
It does in some regard, and like half of me agrees with you, and half of me is starting to think that, well, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is that you should just ignore the question and just do stuff. Like
with no purpose at all.
Yeah.
So half of you thinks that you've got to have a clear purpose, and the other half thinks that you're better off just like shooting from the hip and doing shit.
Yeah, like not even worrying about answering that question and just go. Just go. Like
see, I agree with that. I think that you just do stuff without knowing necessarily what that purpose is. If you wait around to have a clear explanation,
yes.
Yeah. If this were a dating scenario, that's like, I'm only going to date the person I'm going to marry. Well, okay. You're never going on any dates ever then. It doesn't work that way. Yeah, no. So I'm totally on board with that, where you just do stuff and then figure out, why to keep doing it, really, or why it's good for you. And I don't think it has to be a deep explanation. I think it can be an incredibly simple little tiny thing. We want to help you make something and mean something. And we say that phrase all the time because when you're making something and you know it means something, even if it's just to you, that's when you feel pretty good about what you're creating. The support for the Create Unknown in recent weeks has been incredible. Animators, artists, musicians, YouTubers, aspiring filmmakers, comedians, it is crazy how talented everybody in this community is. Consider joining the Create Unknown Patreon. Every dollar that comes through goes straight into the podcast and its community. That means more highlights videos. It means a big Minecraft project that's on the way. And eventually we'd like to manufacture custom piss bottles so you never have to leave your battle station. And being a patron unlocks participation in all of our live recordings. You've seen the roster of guests we've had. Having access to their minds is a unique opportunity. You can go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown or click the link that's in the description. Every little bit helps, and your support means absolutely everything to us. Patreon.com/thecreateunknown, links in the description. We appreciate you, Space Cowboys.
So I'm going to say something really weird now, but I finally kind of got to the root of my thoughts about this. So we're just going to go here now. We're just going to go here now, and you're going to deal with this. Okay.
Well, keep in mind that we can edit out anything extremely strange. So there's really no risk here.
Okay. No risk here, except for our patrons who are hanging out listening live. So here's I think a really valid question underlying this discussion, which is, why do we care so much when kids die as opposed to someone who's really old? Like, why is it worse when a child gets cancer at 5 years old, it's like the most depressing thing almost imaginable. And we agree on that. Everyone agrees on that. Like childhood cancer is absolutely horrific. It is way at the top of the list of human tragedy. Okay. Well, an 85-year-old getting cancer is pretty low. Unless it is literally your relative on the list of human tragedies. And so
people are like, well, you got to die of something.
Why?
Nobody says, well, you got to die of something when it's a 4-year-old.
Yes. So the question is why, and the answer, as far as I can figure, is this concept of potential.
Yes. And the chat agrees with you, by the way. That's it's rolling in here that it's this tragedy of lost potential.
Which is a weird concept that human beings all somehow understand. Like, this is a pretty abstract idea, potential, that somebody can do some unknown amorphous accomplishment sometime later that is for some reason important to them and to the rest of us. That is a pretty weird idea.
Yeah, it's definitely abstract, and it's so hard. Like when we try to quantify that, like Charles brings up quantifying that in things like wrongful death suits. Yeah, there are definitely times where we have to think about, like, in a legal sense, how do you put a dollar amount on a change in quality of life? Like all sorts of future earnings. You can look at past earnings and extrapolate, and like, you can usually get to it there. But when it's something like potential or happiness, it gets really muddy. But it's obviously there. It's there because Kevin, it's what you're saying. Like that thing exists to the point where we know that we have to deal with it, even in something like a court of law, which is as cut and dry as we really get with anything. You can't sidestep it in that setting.
So if we can agree, and I hope that we can, that potential exists and is highly valuable, highly important, and highly valuable, and everyone seems to agree with that, then it stands to reason from there that wasting that potential, not utilizing that potential, not exploring that potential is a bad thing.
Yeah, so, I see where you put that together. When you first debuted this topic, I was like, oh, I don't have any idea where this is headed. The more you talked about it, now I get it. If we have this inherent sense that potential matters, then you got to do something with that potential, don't you? You should. I mean, it wouldn't matter if you weren't supposed to do something with it.
Exactly. So doing
that makes a lot of sense.
That's the reason. That's the answer for this. Why do anything? It's baked in to the human experience that we have this potential. Everyone agrees that potential exists and is valuable and is important and is worth getting upset over and devastated by if it's lost to something like a childhood accident or something. Mm-hmm. Well, then you have to engage with fulfilling the potential. Yeah. With at least you have to engage with playing out what manner of potential that may be. And it's all abstract and it's all undefined for everyone. So don't worry about that part. Don't worry about that you don't know what your potential is or how much of it you have. No one knows. People around you might have a better sense of it than you do, which is definitely something that I felt in my life, where like other people saw potential within me that like I didn't see at all. I didn't understand. And I think part of what I hope to accomplish with the Create Unknown at like writ large is encouraging people to understand that they need to be exploring their potential. Like they need to be engaging with it in some regard. And you don't need more of an explanation or a rationalization for why you should be doing that or why it's better. Or why it's better than doing nothing. It's inherently better than doing nothing. We agree with it, but we like forget that and we ignore it for some reason. And that's definitely a shame and a problem. But the answer is within being alive, really. And it is this thing of potential.
Yep. I think that is 100% valid and it makes perfect sense. I think there are a lot of details, a lot of stuff beyond that. But if all you had was a recognition of potential and that potential mattering, that's enough. It can get better. You can get a greater understanding. It can be easier to justify things that you do and don't do. You can absolutely refine it and get things on an automatic easy mode. However, if you're struggling with it, and I think we know a lot of people who struggle with this. We know a lot of people who do nothing. We know a lot of very talented people who do nothing. We know people who have done stuff and now they do nothing. like all the roads that lead to nothing. Kevin and I know a whole lot of people who have trod or are treading on those roads. They have given up on their potential or they don't recognize that it matters. I think that's the first step. I think that satisfies that big question of why should I do anything at all? Well, there's a reason to do something. Now figure out exactly what you want to do, exactly why you want to do it, how it makes you feel, how to do it in such a way that, you're happy, that you connect with other people. It's just whatever you need. You figure that out after that first step. But the first step is, should I do anything at all or should I do nothing? It's not okay to do nothing. It is not okay to do nothing. And that's something that I don't recall seeing that really anywhere. It should bother you to do nothing. If it doesn't, you really need to consider why. You need to consider why you're so comfortable with doing nothing and being in perpetuity, ignoring potential. And potential too, I want to qualify that potential is a huge, broad thing. Usually when people are talking about potential, they're talking about great things, the top end of it, peak performance kind of potential. No. It doesn't have to be peak anything. You have the potential to do literally everything. It all counts. It all counts. And this is something we talked about the other week where little things really matter a lot. Tiny things matter a lot. That's exercising your potential, doing those tiny things, not having clothes all over your bedroom floor. So you're never walking on the carpet because you live like a disaster. Guess what? Sorting that situation out, doing your laundry, putting it away, having a well-organized life like that is exercising your potential. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go out and exercise your potential by curing childhood cancer. It would be very cool if you could. If you have the means and the ability to do that, please do it. If it is, to borrow the famous phrase, cleaning your room, well, guess what? That's fine. That is totally okay. It might not be, it probably shouldn't be your life's work. You shouldn't do your laundry and think, well, it's all downhill from here. I have absolutely peaked by washing my clothes and matching up every sock. But could be the pinnacle for the last half hour of your life. That is totally okay. That is totally necessary to have a series of little tiny pinnacles. That's what a great day is. It's waking up having slept well. It's eating a breakfast that tastes good to you. These are all little wins of exercising your potential. And you string them together throughout a day, you've had a good day. Boom, it's right there. And it's all based on recognizing that each of these little things matters. There's a point to doing it. You don't need to subscribe to some major overarching philosophy that gives you a reason or explains the point to you. It's helpful if you do. It's great to have a set of rules to follow. But if that's not you, you don't need to invent everything. It's enough to recognize what Kevin's saying on potential, that it's worth doing stuff. It's worth getting out of bed and just doing something, anything at all. That's the potential is there to do something. So do it. That's enough.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the sort of the tiny wins there, because I was going to say the same thing. Like don't assume that this means you need to create the next great YouTube channel or be the next great musician. Like those are cool. Like you should try to do that if that's what you want to do. If that's not something you're interested in, or it's not in your wheelhouse, or you don't have the means, that's fine too. It could be fixing a latch on the gate in your backyard that you've been ignoring. That's a huge win. You know, it could be, you know, sorting your taxes. It could be whatever, like little things, calling your uncle who no one talks to. And maybe you could, you know, talk to your uncle, and reach out.
It can be wiping your inbox. Get rid of the million cruddy emails that are clogging up your inbox. Who cares? That's something. You know, we talked about this weeks ago, where my rule was, if there's something to do, do it. That fits with all of this. And that's why we wanted to hit this big topic today, because it's an umbrella over virtually everything we've talked about for a month. It all functions with this. You know, the stuff like, Charles says, rule number 2, do the work. Yeah, putting in the work. If there is literally anything to do, doing that is better than doing nothing. Well, all of this stuff combined is how you avoid hitting a point where you do nothing, where you are the person in the tweet that is not interested in anything, that doesn't have a whole lot of an identity themselves, that doesn't have, for lack of a better word, membership in any group. It's not like most groups have members, but any communal experience with anything aside from, you know, being in an MMO guild. This is what keeps you from being that person. And I do want to acknowledge that some people have a very difficult time with this through reasons that you can't just will yourself out of. You know, you can't combat, you know, clinical depression with just being like, oh, actually, the problem here is that I didn't realize I had potential. Now it's okay. Now my depression's gone. No, that's not happening.
No.
Now it's not going to hurt your struggle with depression. It's, but you know, I think we acknowledge that this is not a cure-all for everything.
It's not just pick yourself up by the bootstraps speech.
Yeah,
like let's not that, because obviously that's a clownish.
That has limits.
Yeah. It's a clownish thing.
Yeah. Although the straps on my favorite pair of boots on one of the legs, it is ripping because I yank on the bootstraps with such frequency and such intensity.
Right.
I do pick myself up by the bootstraps to the detriment of the bootstraps. But all this stuff matters, and you're going to feel better and more motivated when you realize that these are accessible topics to think about. They aren't too big. You know, it seems like, and we started too with like, hey, we're going to look at this weirdly large existential question. And we've spent 168, 970 episodes dancing around some of the things that we've talked about. They're huge. However, most of them you can make a little bit of progress on very, very easily, like recognizing that your potential does matter. That takes 2 seconds. It doesn't take any kind of special life experience or any level of genius. It's like, no, I matter, and what I'm able to do matters. That's enough to take you a few steps down the road away from doing nothing. Or if you're running toward nothing, well, maybe that slows you down. Maybe it stops you. But all of these things combined, they add up to the healthy, productive mindset that we see, and we've seen for, you know, a decade in the online creative space, but we've seen for another solid decade in other arenas before this. This is what almost all the people I know who are successful roughly believe. By successful, I mean productive. I don't mean material success of any kind. I straight up mean productive people. They generally have a sense of all the things that we've been talking about. They don't think exactly the same way. It's not like that. You know, it's not like a Tim Ferriss book where it's like, you know, you've got to do these things to have a 4-hour work week. No. This is really general stuff. But these things matter to all the people except for a tiny, tiny portion. That tiny portion, they are insane. They are straight up weirdos. They do not function in like any realm that we would consider normal. They're so odd and strange and unique that they're just freaks, you know? I mean, Casey Neistat is a freak. Justine is a freak. People are not like them where they churn out crazy content for like daily for 20 years. That is such a deviation from the mean that you cannot count those people as like being part of the group that you look toward. It's amazing. They are incredible. Michael Jordan, I know you mentioned him as being one of those freaks, Kevin, in a past episode. Like Michael Jordan was an athletic freak.
A competitive freak, really, more than anything.
Competitive freak, yes.
Just
yeah,
the most competitive person of all time.
Yeah. Kevin and I have spent, for some reason, months talking or like recognizing how much of a freak Tony Gwynn was, a baseball player, and mostly in the 90s. He was just a freak when it came to hitting. Like it's really unlikely that somebody is going to replicate what he did in our lifetime. It's possible. And if it does happen, there's going to be one of them. So freaks exist. The other 99.99+% of highly productive people we have ever known have answers to all of these questions that we've put forth. They're not the same answers, but they have answers, and they believe in the really basic tenets, like me exercising my potential is useful.
Yeah, it's a useful way to spend your life. I mean, really, It's as simple as that. It's like, what do I do with my life? Well, I start by trying to see how you could fulfill your potential, and that will fit whatever circumstances you're in, no matter who you are. Like, this is not a thing where it's like, well, I can't do that because of X, Y, Z. It's like, no, you could do some version, your own version of that. You know, one thing I was thinking is like a really good thing that people can do is try to be somebody who other people at work look forward to working with. I mean, when I was a cook,
that's good.
When I was a cook, I remember having a quote unquote dream team, and there was like me and these two other guys who I just loved working with. Every time I had a shift with these two guys, we had our own like specific stations that we really liked. We all like respected each other's preferences on like what we like to do behind the line. And we all took it seriously enough that there were no complaints. We didn't screw anything up. All the orders went out properly, and it was smooth on that front. And all the while, we had similar senses of humor where we could joke and pass the time, and make the shift go by faster. So all of that combined to like, oh, I really like working with John and Mark, and that made my life better because I had to go to work anyway. I was going to be there for, 10 hours anyway, whatever. It was nice on those days where I had two other people that were pleasant and great and fun to work with, as opposed to somebody who it's like, oh man, I'm stuck with this person. This shift is going to suck. Like, we all know that experience. That could be one. And I'm not going to tell you on this podcast how to be a person that other people want to work with, because I don't know what your job is. I don't know what your personality type is. Like, all of that stuff varies greatly. But at the very least, I can suggest that could be something to work toward, trying to figure out.
What about putting it like this? Try to be somebody that other people would want to choose for a group project. That's like the ultimate measure, isn't it? Because you all know who you don't want to work with on a group project in school. That's the first instance of what Kevin's talking about happens for the rest of your life. Whether it's like, be the person that your family wants to see at Christmas. Be the person that somebody wants to work with in the kitchen. And at the least, That's really hard to do, obviously. It's hard to be the one that everybody loves. But you can definitely not be the one that elicits a groan when the teacher pairs you up with them. You can avoid being the person who shows up to the kitchen shift and the other person is like, Jesus Christ, this is going to be the longest day of my life.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't have to be amazing, but you can definitely avoid sucking to the max.
I was going to say, there are simple things that have nothing to do really. Some of it has to do with temperament, but things like showing up late, like cutting corners, like being lazy, doing a bad job, not caring. Like those are all things like really within everybody's wheelhouse that they could, and maybe at work, you work with a bunch of people who all do that. And maybe that's how you get together. And if you're going to be like an uptight person to work with, it doesn't flow very well within that social group. That's why I'm saying there's no like magic bullet here, but it's just one other example, I think, that's non-creative of trying to fulfill your potential. So
I do want to I want to bring this back to where we started too, which is everybody being in their own niche, and that hyper individualism making it very difficult to really care about anything. When you start to do the stuff that we're talking about and think about it a little bit, that is infectious. Your clarity on stuff like, it matters that I do X, Y, or Z. Well, that provides an explanation for other people, and they tend to be really into that when you help them understand a thing. Now, it's a little bit, what is the word? It almost sounds condescending to say like, oh, you're helping them understand a thing. No. It's not that at all. It's not that at all. It just changes the mood a little bit, and other people enjoy it. They want to do things with you. They want to talk to you about them. And you start to take your own individual bits like that, and you can be that hyper unique person who exists in 11 different niches and start to branch out with other people a lot more easily. So yeah, when you really have a kind of a mindset like we're talking about, it makes other people just want to share the thing with you. And I want to use an example because he's not here. So NRM is very active in our Discord. He's got a channel on YouTube called Bear Bites. He's been grinding away this year. He had a smallish realistic goal of having a certain number of subs for the year. That was his goal for the channel. He hit that a few weeks ago. That's good. He's got a couple hundred subscribers. It's not a massive operation. He does have a day job, but he understands all of this stuff, and it makes it awesome to talk to him about his channel and the creative stuff that he's doing. When he's got a problem, it's nice to talk about the problem because it's in the context of this greater kind of like, hey, I enjoy making this art and I think there's a reason to make this art. He's really excellent with that. And I know a lot of people who have crazy numbers on YouTube. I know a lot of people who do extremely well. I know people who have to hide virtually every facet of their lives because they would be devoured by the barbarian hordes of the people who love them if anybody got a hold of any of it. But I enjoy talking with him about YouTube and creative stuff more than almost anybody. I mean, I can't rank them, but he's in the top 10. Well, that's how much it matters. That's how it's like infectious toward me for him to have this attitude. I love it. It's great. And he understands too that there are a lot of questions he hasn't answered. Like that's part of his, I hate this phrase, but like creative journey. He knows that he's not at the end of it or at the peak of it or anything, that he's developing a channel. It's growing. He's figuring out his content. He's figuring out the workflow, who he wants to work with, how it fits into his personal life, all these normal things. He acknowledges where he's at. But overall, he's into it, and it is infectious. I love it. When people are like him, I want to talk to them. I want to get to know them. I want to see them in the Discord every day. I want to hear what's up with them. And I'm also not annoyed when they have a problem or a really bad day. It makes it just part of the experience. They're not somebody who comes in and complains. they're a real person who comes in and it's like, well, this is the bump in the road today. But that's the difference. And I know a lot of the people listening know who I'm talking about because they're active in the Discord, and they can put this one in context, but it makes a difference when you're driven by just even the slightest bit of recognizing that you have potential of some kind, and you really got to do something about it.
Yeah. And other people notice, and other people absolutely notice. And there's not a whole lot to notice if you're not doing anything. So what are you doing? Nothing. All right. Well, I don't notice anything.
Nobody can notice.
What am I supposed to notice?
Nobody can get to know anything about you. You can't be part of anything if you do nothing. You isolate yourself from everything you need to be happy. You can't do that to yourself. You can't close off every possible road to feeling good and then wonder, like, God, why does every day suck? Like, that's a big part of why.
It is. But I do not, and I know that you don't either, but I don't blame anyone who has done this or who are in this position, because again, bringing it back sort of to the beginning, is that I think a lot of the culture that we're growing up in, that Zoomers at least are growing up in, Matt and I didn't really grow up in, is so atomized that that these questions are being asked to a degree that they just really weren't before. We just sort of plowed ahead and didn't really worry about it and just did stuff.
No.
And I sort of, like, if we can leave this episode on anything, I really think the simplest thing I could say, or piece of advice, is it's better to just you should just plow ahead and do stuff and not worry about rationalizing it or having some grand explanation, or just go for it, because the benefits will reveal themselves along the way, and nothing will come of doing nothing. It's as simple as that, really. So I'm really looking forward to seeing some of the comments on this episode. So please share your experiences. I'll definitely check them out and would love to read them. And, perhaps we can follow up sometime in the new year on this discussion, because I think it's an ongoing one. And I think that we're going to have to talk a lot more about a lot of things that previously I think human beings sort of took for granted. We're no longer taking for granted. And we have to sort of talk our way through getting back to a place where people just start taking some stuff for granted again, and moving forward in a positive manner.
That's a big realization that we've had. And by we, it was on this one, it was like 90% Kevin and 10% me agreeing with Kevin. I will say that you cracked the code on this one, that you noticed that some of these really big questions that we never thought about because it was baked in to all the things that made up our experience are now questions again. There's a lot of stuff that has come up with, not just in the creative sphere, but a lot of questions that it never would have occurred to me, even 10 years ago, that they would be questions. It's like somebody, being like, yeah, it depends on what the definition of is. You're like, oh, how do I even answer that question? Why are you asking it? Well, guess what? Sometimes it's a real question. There are some topics that are crushing huge amounts of people. They're pushing others away from being productive and happy, but they're pretty basic. And I think that we can address them. And like Kevin said, we're going to have to talk more, because we do have these George Costanza moments where we think of something an hour or a month after we've recorded the podcast, been like, oh, should have expressed that cleaner, or gone a little bit deeper, or hit this tangent to it. So yeah, it's an evolving thing. But I'm excited to do this. I'm excited to do it for my own sake too. As I've been streaming, one thing that I've really enjoyed about that is that I'm doing something completely new to me, which has forced me to think, in some cases for the first time, about a process that I've been involved in for 10 years. So, for example, I don't actually make any content. I don't make anything. I'm not that guy. I don't do that. I help other people make things. Well, when you're streaming, that's you. you have to make it. So I'm coming at it from a different angle, and I it's a fresh perspective on those things. So I'm thinking a lot about a lot of foundational aspects to what we do, to what the people we talk to do. And so I'm excited to ask them in the coming year about these things. We can get some really good answers out of people and do a little better on our own.
Yeah, so I want to leave it with this. If anybody is struggling with any of these things and, you want to reach out, please reach out. Leave a YouTube comment, tweet us, leave a comment on Patreon, whatever it is. Let us know, because this is sort of the point of this podcast when you get to brass tacks is, we talk to all these really successful people doing great creative things, but at the end of the day, if a whole new generation of people are coming up thinking, why should I bother doing anything? Well, that's a much bigger problem than figuring out like what thumbnail to use and getting that, advice
right.
from like Marquez Brownlee or whatever. It's like, maybe we should start from the beginning with some of this stuff. And I'm more than willing to do that. So that's it for this week. We will see you in the new year, 2023, I think. I don't know. Just a couple weeks ago, I wrote 2021 on something, and I'm like, I don't even know what year it is. I don't even know what year it is.
I don't quite know what's happening, but I know it's not backwards.
It's not backwards. All right. We're moving forwards. We're out of here. Thanks to all of our patrons for hanging out. It was a good crowd. It was a good chat. If you want to become a patron, go to patreon.com/thecreateunknown and become a $2 tot or more. You never know. All right. We'll be back next week. Until then, see you, Space Cowboys.
Thanks for listening to The Create Unknown. We make this show with the support of our patrons. 100% of that goes directly to keeping episodes going every week, and the recent support has been amazing. Sid Poke, NRM, Venture Addicts, Weezer Good, you all really do make this show happen. Thank you to the Tots and Dumpster crew, old and new, who save tiny little lives every month. Thank you to our grizzled, battle-hardened child infantry. Clemente de los Santos, Dan the Latch, Demetrius Andrews, Erica, Farrakhan, Jen Mefisanti, Kevin Menard, Mikhail Steinke, Monahim, Natsu, Penny Peddler, Risebread, Ryan Kinder, Samuel Manser, Sean S., Sean Malone, and Tom Videoger. And a tremendous shout out to our elite baby gang commanders: Atrocious Guff, Kat, Dojangles, Graham Robertson, James Gallagher, Jeff Davis, Orange Vanilla Coke, Patrick Pister, TCU's personal pilot, Andy, Ryan Carroll, Baseweight, Vinthos, Yeetus Deletus, Jonas Walter, Nathan Robinson, Jelksies, and of course, Trevstead. You are the elite. Thank you as well to our indentured servants, producer-editor Ben Webster, Minecraft mogul Laterman, Discord kitten wrangler Conrad, and producer emeritus Dan Yoshua. Thanks to Baseweight for use of Created in the Unknown for the opening theme. Thanks to Electro Voice for giving us mics to sound good on top of it. And a special thanks to Main Gear for powering all of our PC endeavors. The Create Unknown is an Unknown Media production in partnership with Studio 71.